Greetings everyone, my name is Raziel and welcome to a new video on my channel. Today we are going to take a look at the Sons of Horus faction and which cards I consider to be the staples for that faction, meaning which cards are more or less the best ones that you can and will see in most Sons of Horus decks. Do note that this is geared towards the standard mode only, meaning we are only looking at Sons of Horus cards from the Shadow of the Warmaster as well as the Galaxy in Flames expansions. Also, this video is not meant to show you every card from the faction that is playable. There are quite a few solid cards in the faction that I will not be mentioning in this video. Reason being, this video is meant to showcase the more or less most generic cards you can use for virtually any Sons of Horus deck. Of course, certain decks will want to expand on this core in a certain way, adding different cards to it depending on your strategy. But an aggro deck might favor different cards for this than, let's say, a midrange deck. Lastly, if you enjoy this type of video and want to see me cover other factions as well, leave a like and let me know in the comments. I cannot promise that I'll do one for every faction out there, given I don't play every faction in the game, but I could certainly do a few more videos of this kind on a couple of other factions. With all that out of the way, let's get started. This is what I would consider the core of more or less every Sons of Horus deck out there. I say more or less because there technically is one specific playstyle for the Sons of Horus that I would definitely say does not use this core, but more on this later. I will now be going over every card and explain why it's there. First of all, we have Avatar of the Four. Avatar is generally one of those cards that you will want to include in every deck if you own it, but if you don't own it, that is also not the end of the world. Generally, it's a nice to have type of card, but shouldn't be a priority to obtain when it comes to legendaries for this faction. Overall though, this is a great card as it allows you to guarantee the survival of your warlord for one more turn, which can definitely be a game winner at times. Also, you can use it to essentially gain sneak attack on your warlord to take out some big troops without taking damage. Essentially, the card has no downside, and as such is definitely a staple. Next is Furious Shooting. This is a very simple but effective card. 3 damage burn for 2 energy is great value and can be used to either push for damage onto the enemy warlord or to take out a troop. Overall, just a very solid and very versatile card. After this we have Menades Squad. Menades is one of the stickiest 2 energy troops in the entire game. Drop Pod combined with 3 HP means the opponent is never going to remove this troop without using 1 or 2 cards in addition to their warlord. Therefore, it's reasonable to expect this troop to survive the enemy turn, which makes for a great turn 1 play and enables further trades in your favor as you now have a unit on the board to trade with. It also has a nice passive ability to deal some burn damage to the enemy warlord, however this rarely ends up being more than 2 or 3 points of damage in most games. Still, insanely good body for an early game troop combined with essentially free damage, one of the best 2 energy troops in the game without a doubt. Following this is Chieftain Clethal, who is also a pretty cracked troop. 3 energy with 4 attack and 3 HP is solid, add Drop Pod and it's a pretty hard to remove card. On top of this, Clethal also turns all Drop Pods, including his own, into a 2-3 as opposed to an 0-2, which not only is impossible to open for most warlords without help, but it now also deals a non-negligible amount of damage. Therefore, similar to Menades, Clethal is nearly guaranteed to survive the enemy turn. Unlike Menades however, Clethal has a pretty high attack stat at 4, which combined with his HP stat hitting the benchmark of 3, allows him to bash most warlords for 4 damage and survive, potentially allowing for up to 8 damage in total. Needless to say, this makes him a very strong troop for every deck. Next up we have Ezreal Support. This is basically the epitome of a rock solid 3 energy tempo play. Balanced stats, Drop Pod to make removing it immediately very hard and a solid ability. This card has basically no downsides, it's fairly simple yet effective. Sergeant Kalheem may be a surprise to see for some, but he is actually a pretty strong troop. Most Sons of Horus decks still play fairly aggressive, even if they are not a designated aggro deck. Kalheem allows for 2 immediate points of damage. But Raziel, Kalheem only has 2 HP, he's going to get taken out by the enemy warlord for free. Exactly. And in doing so, he then deals 4 points of damage to the enemy warlord, combined with the spear tip, adding up to 6 points of damage for 3 energy. That is a very high amount of damage for such little energy, and a lot of decks greatly appreciate that. Entering the 4 energy section, we have Catalan Reavers. This is yet another simple but effective card, something the Sons of Horus are known for. Basically, the Reavers are just a 4 energy 4/4 with fast, meaning they can bash for 4 damage and leave behind a 4/2 body if they bashed into, for example, the enemy warlord. And 4 damage for 4 energy is simply great value, especially if you're getting a body with 4 attack on top of that. And similar to Kalheem, yes, the enemy warlord can just attack into it, but they will take another 4 damage in the process, adding up to 8 damage in total. In general, just another great card without a major downside. Next we have Death Dealers. I will mention that Death Dealers is very often not the AoE of choice for the Sons of Horus. However, if you do decide to use a different anti-stealth than Call of Cowardice, Death Dealers is a more than reasonable choice for AoE. Therefore, I did include it in this list, as it is a more than viable AoE choice and will be played if the aforementioned scenario is the case. Like it in my opinion currently is, with Urban Warfare being arguably the best anti-stealth around at the moment. Rounding out the 4 energy slot is Legionary Solkars. Despite his below average stats, Solkars is a great troop. Once again, Drop Pod enables this troop to be fairly sticky, and his passive ability is great for basically every deck. Plus, it can affect your warlord as well, which is generally a high value effect to have, as 3 attack on your warlord enables far more traits to go in your favor. Following Solkars, we have the faction's heart removal tactic, Crush the Weak. This retrain of the old outflank is basically the gold standard for heart removal, essentially determining that destroying a troop is worth 5 energy. Do note that there is only 1 copy in this list, and that is because, as mentioned, Sons of Horus play fairly aggressive overall, and as such don't really enter the part of the game where big troops come into play very often. Therefore, only running 1 copy of the heart removal is more than fine. The last 5 energy card is Ekron Fall. Ekron is similar to Chieftain Clothal from earlier in that he mainly is an oversetted body that is very hard to get rid of. In theory, he does have a few funny interactions with his passive, allowing for example Ezreal support to use ability to turn its plate without opening drop pod, but for the most part Ekron Fall is simply a 6/6 for 5 energy that is either going to draw out the enemy heart removal because of its added drop pod, or on your turn is either trading into something or pushing for big 6 damage on the enemy warlord. Again, simple, effective and no downside. Next is our final tactic of the day, Lupercal Pursuant. Again, simple yet effective, 6 damage for 6 energy is amazing value. This is your primary finisher of the faction and can be combined with cards like Furious Shooting or your Warlord Attack to result in a pretty high lethal range that is not to be underestimated. And lastly we have Overseer Ludak. Ludak is just our second copy of Ekron Fall essentially, meaning just an overstatted body meant to either draw removal or push for big damage, if the opponent doesn't have removal. Of course, Ludak technically is not overstatted. In fact, 5/6 for 6 energy is actually understatted. However, on Spear Tip he gains a Mark of Chaos, which results in at least becoming a 6/6 for 6 energy, which is an average stat line. But Ludak also has a resolution, which buffs all troops with a Mark of Chaos by +1/+1, including himself, and this results in at least a 7/7 for 6 energy, with the potential to be more depending on the mark you got. Technically, he can also buff other troops if they also have a Mark of Chaos, for sure, but if you paid attention until now, you will notice that there are actually no cards in this list that even mention Marks of Chaos. And indeed, for the most part, Sons of Horus have basically given up on the Mark of Chaos theme entirely, and the only occasional source of marks can be found on the warlords rather than the cards themselves, like Jewald Mar or Horus Lupercal. Now we have taken a look at every card in this list. As you can see, this is a very solid core for basically all mid-range and aggro decks the faction is known to play. This is due to a lot of troops boasting drop pod, which is amazing for establishing board control and sets the stage for making smart trades and ultimately snowballing the game in your favor. The list also contains a lot of great cards for more aggressive playstyles, threatening a lot of damage immediately. Generally, the Sons of Horus are a very solid beginner faction, able to teach players the value of board control, and that just because a card doesn't have 5 lines of text on it, doesn't mean it's bad. Now, as you might remember at the start of the video, I mentioned that the Sons of Horus have one more playstyle apart from the mid-range and aggro variants. Which brings us to the final part of this video, Planetary Invasion. In my opinion, Planetary Invasion is a valid strategy as well, and the recent meta reports seem to confirm this by showing great win rates for the likes of Ezekyle Abaddon, for example, the primary invasion warlord out there. Planetary Invasion does play quite different from the regular mid-range and aggro builds, which is why I also have a list of staples on that playstyle as well. I will only go over cards that we haven't spoken about already. New to the list is Lead the Spear Tip. This card is meant to fish for our main playmaker in this deck, MacLeod. We will talk about MacLeod himself later. For now, all you need to know is that MacLeod is an essential part of this deck's strategy, and basically having 3 copies of him in this deck is amazing. The first new troop is Chieftain Squad. Chieftain is one of our invasion targets, and it buffs every troop put into play with a Mark of Chaos. This is a decent effect, and its cost is low enough that you can also play this outside of invasion as well, while still retaining a meaningful purpose inside of it. In general, I would say that this spot is fairly flexible, however. There are invasion builds out there that utilize bigger troops, like Praetor Goliath for example, as additional invasion targets. I have chosen Chieftain Squad here because I believe it is the most versatile troop you could be playing, but if you feel like you want to go more all in, other options are certainly viable as well. Another new addition is Darth Vader, Darth Nerva. This is purely meant to be an invasion drop. His resolution buffs all other Astartes with a Mark of Chaos similar to Chieftain Squad. This can enable an already potent invasion pool to ridiculous heights. However, outside of invasion he is kind of meh, so only 1 copy. Next we have just Terran Elite. The main purpose of this card is to ensure we don't just die after playing invasion. Frontline plus drop pod plus a potential mark from either Chieftain or Nerva is incredibly hard to remove, and if the enemy uses harsh removal, we are likely going to survive the turn as the opponent just wasted a big portion of their energy on said removal. Overall, this isn't an amazing troop, but it's the only Astartes with frontline, which we do kind of need in this type of deck. Second from last is MacLeod. As already mentioned, MacLeod is a key piece of this deck. He allows us to play a tactic for free, essentially reducing the cost of invasion down to 8 or 7 energy if you pulled MacLeod from Lead the Spear Tip. This can be devastating if combined with additional ramp, meaning energy gain, and is the core combo this deck is built around. Needless to say, if you want to play this combo, you need MacLeod. Finally, we have arrived at the heart of the deck, Planetary Invasion itself. This is your primary win con in addition from the regular burn tools. Cheat it out early with MacLeod and end the game in a swift turn with potentially insane amounts of damage. Being the core card of this playstyle, you obviously need this card to play this type of deck. To conclude on this playstyle, you can definitely see that the fundamental structure is different compared to the other core. The main focus is more on the late game as opposed to the early game, with effectively no low-cost Astartes to be seen. All the Astartes are big enough to be an immediate threat when dropped from Planetary Invasion, with most of them even increasing the stats of your units. Overall, I would say that the number of Astartes is pretty much perfect and should minimize bricks while still offering enough targets should you end up drawing into some Astartes before you can play the combo. And with that, we have gone over every staple card for the Sons of Horus when it comes to mid-range and aggro builds, as well as the Planetary Invasion combo. Once again, these lists are not meant to show every playable Sons of Horus card. They are more so a condensed version of most Sons of Horus decklists, meant to give newer players an idea as to which cards to focus on collecting first. Finally, balance patches can and will change some of these cards eventually. Maybe in a few months or even years, you will look at a Sons of Horus faction that has been reworked from the ground up, and now most of those cards no longer do what they did in this video. So do take these recommendations with some skepticism. That concludes my general overview on the Sons of Horus and which cards I consider to be staples for basically every deck of the faction. If you enjoyed this video and want to see me cover different factions as well, leave a like and let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and until next time.